Your Honor, we are here to hold the defendant, Mr. Nixon, responsible for the actions he chose to take. We are here to hold him accountable for what he did on June 5th, 2022 and July 2nd, 2022. The state will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Mr. Nixon, committed the crimes of improperly handling a firearm in a motor vehicle, murder with a firearm specification, and there are 2 counts, felonious assault with a firearm specification, and tampering with evidence, and that these acts were not committed in self-defense. Before I get into what happened and who all was involved, I want to take a minute to talk about self-defense, Your Honor. Self-defense, as the court knows, is the defendant saying, I did it. It was me. I did it. I just had a legal justification for doing it. Your Honor, self-defense is when the defendant was not at fault in creating a situation giving rise to the affray, and the defendant had reasonable grounds to believe that he was in imminent, immediate danger of death or great bodily harm, and the defendant had an honest belief, even if mistaken, that he was in imminent, immediate danger of death or great bodily harm, and the defendant was in a place he had a legal right to be. And I know the court realized I emphasized the word and. All of those, as the court is aware, must be present for the affirmative defense of self-defense. The state will prove beyond a reasonable doubt, as stated, this was not self-defense. So the state will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was at fault in creating a situation giving rise to the affray. Or, that may be a 2-letter word, but it is very important, or the defendant did not have reasonable grounds to believe that he was in imminent, immediate danger of death or great bodily harm. Or the defendant did not have an honest belief, even if mistaken, that he was in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm. And lastly, or the defendant was not in a place he had a legal right to be. And again, I stress that word or, because the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt just one of those criteria, just one, and the affirmative defense fails. And if that affirmative defense fails, you're left with, I did it. It was me, with no legal justification. Now, what happened and who all was involved? On June 22nd, 2022, Your Honor, at 809 Kenmore Boulevard, multiple 911 calls were received regarding shots fired. The callers gave a description of the suspect vehicle. When the officers arrived on scene, they saw the defendant driving a vehicle that matched. Once the defendant stopped and the officers approached the car, they saw an AK-47 on the driver's seat. More ammo was found in and about the car. The defendant was arrested and he was Mirandized, Your Honor. Under Miranda, he said, people are messing with him. He thought people were pulling up on him. However, he also admitted to firing multiple rounds in the air and that he bought the rifle from a guy off the streets and carries it for protection. Your Honor, you will hear these 911 calls and see the firearm that the officers found on the driver's seat. Now, what happened on July 25th, 2022, and who all was involved? Well, it was at 2260 Maryland Avenue. Who all was involved was Angel McClain and Ronald Crew. They were both living at 2260 Maryland Avenue. It was actually Angel McClain's apartment that Ron Crew had been staying with her, living with her for quite a while. You also have Adam Wright, Ashley Broughton, and the defendant, Quinton Nixon. They all had been staying there visiting between 1 and 3 weeks or so as well. Finally, you have Brian Fielders and Toni Westover. They had come over that day, July 25th, 2022, to visit. Now, you have about 7 people in this tiny apartment, and I believe I call it in the house. It's an apartment, Your Honor. In this apartment, small apartment. Everyone was doing drugs. Their drug of choice was meth. They were doing it multiple times a day for multiple days prior. Everyone was getting high, feeling the effects of getting high. They were enjoying themselves. They were all getting along and having a good time. There was no arguing, no fussing, no fighting, Your Honor. The defendant was high, and due to lack of sleep and the effects of the drugs, and thinking Toni was the police, he grabbed Toni's gun. Now, how did he know about this gun? They were in the living room, Your Honor. Toni needed something out of her purse. That gun, she emptied the contents on the table, and there was the gun. After he grabbed that gun out her purse, a tussle ensued. Toni tried to get her gun back. He pinned Toni up against the door, the wall by the door, by her hair and neck, and he shot her, Your Honor. Again, prior to this happening, everyone was getting along. Everyone was no arguing, no fighting, no fussing. Now, he shoots Toni on the base of the neck and the arm. Brian Fielders and Adam, who was out there in the living room kitchen area, tried to help because the defendant was waving the gun, pointing at everybody. They tried to help. Brian Fielders tried to wrestle him and even bit his lip and bit the defendant on the cheek, on the face. And he'll testify to that. Adam, who had his own weapon, pulled his own weapon and tried to stop the defendant. Evidence and testimony will show the other individuals I named in this small apartment were in the back bedrooms, Your Honor, at this time. They will testify that when they heard the ruckus and the noise, they came out and looked. They will testify they saw the defendant have Toni pinned up against the door area, the wall, by her head, with a gun close to her, pointing it at her. And as soon as they fled back into the rooms, they heard the shots. They heard the shots go off that killed Toni. Now, once this happened, everybody, again, smoking, a lot of individuals had warrants, they decided to flee. They jumped off the balcony that is connected to Ron Cruz's room. As the defendant fled the scene, Your Honor, he took Toni Westover's gun and her purse, dropping the purse as he hit the ground, leaving it. No one was caught that day. No one was found that day. Prior to that, individuals were interviewed, with the exception of Adam Wright, who was recently interviewed. The defendant, Your Honor, was arrested approximately a month later on August 24th, 2022, at 525 Gridley Avenue. The defendant was arrested after a standoff with the police, and SWAT had to be called out. Chemical agents were deployed in the house because the defendant was hiding in the attic in a small crawl space. By this time, the defendant had changed his appearance to try to evade capture. He had shaved his hair and his facial hair. SWAT did successfully apprehend the defendant that day, and he was interviewed. He was taken to the station and interviewed. Evidence and testimony will show that the defendant made admissions, and he changed his story multiple times in this interview, Your Honor. In the beginning, he never fired a gun. That it was Brian saying Toni was the police. That he did not leave with a gun. Later, he admitted he had a gun and dropped it or lost it while he was running. He admitted using meth that day. And he said he shot Toni because they made it seem like if I didn't shoot her, they would kill me, Your Honor. The defendant said Brian, with his eyes, by the way he was looking at the defendant, told the defendant to shoot Toni. Your Honor, you will hear the 911 call. You will see the video of the individuals jumping out the balcony. You will see the photos from the scene, and you will have the medical examiner's manner and cause of death. You will also hear testimony from Angel Wright. The state is anticipating you hear testimony from Angel McClain, Ronald Crew, Ashley Broughton, Adam Wright, and Brian Fielders. Those are the individuals who were in that apartment that the state anticipates the court hearing from. Based on that evidence and testimony, Your Honor, the state is confident that you will find this defendant guilty of improperly handling a firearm in a motor vehicle that occurred on June 5th of 2022. You will find him guilty of the murder with the firearm specifications, both counts, felonious assault with a firearm specification, and tampering with evidence that occurred on July 25th of 2022. And most importantly, that these acts were not committed in self-defense. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Easter.